we would
Do you
all
have reason to believe that Casey's not coming? Did he accept
I do not.
invite? I don't know if the manager, I'll send him, I've got 2 computers. I can send an email. I don't know him, but I'm happy to send an email to see if I can, he
Great.
might be having trouble getting in. Okay, hang on.
That would be super.
Let's start the meeting and I will multitask.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and officially call the meeting to order. I don't have bang bang. We are now called to order. This is the task force, which has been called, officially named the Policing, but is actually much broader than that, which we talked about in our city council meeting, and really covers the entire topic of the Welcoming Lebanon Ordinance that was presented to the voters just this past March. And our task is to work on clarifying certain portions and reviewing the what was approved by the voters and making recommendations to the city council. And that is the work of our committee. I'll just say for the record that we are meeting presently on Microsoft Teams, which is required due to the COVID-19 epidemic that is going on and is permitted by executive order of the governor. We are all able to participate contemporaneously and we can hear each other. Some of us are participating through the live video, some are participating on the phone, and but we will work on that so that hopefully everyone can participate by video in the future. And we continue to meet this way until such time it may be possible for us to meet actually in person. Requirements for our, I would like to also let everyone know that the meeting, since it is a public meeting of the City of Lebanon, we are, and so everyone should be aware that this meeting is being recorded. Sean, did I cover all of the things that I have to cover?
Although I know you already said it, but you should just say it again. If you're participating by phone, if you wish to participate, dial *6 if you're muted, and that's all you need to do.
All right, thank you. And I will say that a couple of times during the meeting in case other people join us to hear those instructions. But particularly since Kathy is joining us by phone right now, we did hear from her to *6 to unmute yourself or then to mute yourself again. It is helpful if you are not speaking. It is helpful for members to mute themselves. That way, if there is any background noise from a dog or a cat or a child or whatever it might be, then it won't disrupt the meeting. And then you just have to remember to unmute yourself rather when you want to talk. Some of us, but we can't all see each other. And so if you do feel at any point that there's something that you would like to say, I think my approach will be that you should jump in and say, I have something to say. So that way no one is feeling left out. I will not be offended if anyone jumps in and I'm interrupted. That is absolutely fine. And I think hopefully we can all apply that concept to each other and be a little gracious with each other given the circumstances of the somewhat. I see we have someone else in the lobby who I will admit to the meeting. Wonderful. So I would love to start out on our agenda. I thought that we could start out. I know some of us know each other, but we don't necessarily all know each other. And so I would love for us to go around the table, if you will, and introduce each other so that we all know each other. And then and I had also asked folks to share a goal that they have for this particular task. Or if they have anything to ask for. So I would love to the next few introductions. Is there anyone who would like to start? I don't see hands, so you're gonna have to unmute yourself and talk. Otherwise, I will call on people.
Can I say something?
Yes, and go ahead if you're speaking. Just go ahead and announce your name so that we know who's talking, please.
My name is Susan, and I think somebody has a fan blowing on their mic or something like that.
Okay, are you hearing feedback?
I'm
Yep.
hearing
Okay. I see Devin's head nodding and Susan. So if someone is not speaking, if they can go ahead and mute themselves, that way we are not interrupted by the fan. I know it's very hot, and so I understand that, but if you can just mute yourself if you are not speaking at the current time, that would be great. Thank you so much. Okay, I will start with the introductions. My name is Karen Leo Hill. I am one of the city councilor representatives to this. I am interested in this topic for a number of reasons. The fact that more than 500 people signed this petition for the Welcoming Lebanon Ordinance is really a significant benchmark. We rarely receive citizen petitions, quite honestly. I would say in the past 15 years that I've served on the city council, there have been less than one handful. And so I think any time that such a large number of people engage in that kind of collective action, it's an indication that that there is a large number of people who are interested. So as a public official, it certainly makes me sit up and take notice. On a personal level, and I shared this at the meeting back in January when the city council spoke about this or heard testimony on this issue, I will share that I do have a daughter who is biracial, and certainly raising a child in Lebanon gives me a child of color in Lebanon, where people, minority groups are a small minority, has given me a perspective sometimes on the challenges that different people face. And so I also bring a personal connection to this topic. I know that a lot of the impetus for this was around citizenship and the concern that a lot of people have had over the years about how people who are perhaps not born in this country have been treated by their governments. It's not limited to immigration status. It also covers gender and race and other things. And so I do bring a personal connection and a personal interest in this. So I'm happy to pass the baton to someone else at this point.
Barry Schuster speaking now. I don't have the same depth of political experience that you have, Karen, but I've been in Lebanon for several score of years, so I've really felt the pulse of I call it the town, but the city. And I grew up, I don't usually admit this in polite company, but I grew up in New York, in an extremely heterogeneous area. And so I'm somewhat shocked when I don't see that same diversity here, but it's what I grew up with and what I'm used to. So, and I will say that in my high school years, I was on a committee back in that town doing something similar to this. So it's funny how the circle comes around again. As I said, I think I said I live on Elm Street. I'm a lawyer in town, and so from the legal side, I'm very interested. I think the materials that Attorney Waugh put together were very helpful and well thought out, and I'm just anxious to share whatever I can and participate in any way I can. And I think it's a really salutary project that we have here to be welcoming for whatever reason. Lebanon's a great place, and I'm very pleased to participate. That's all.
Thank you, Barry.
I'll jump in, I guess. I'm Diane Root. I live in West Leb.
I'll jump in next.
Oh, okay.
I see Devin. I heard Diane start, so we'll just have Diane, and then we'll go ahead with Devin afterwards. Thank you.
Okay. I am so aware and convinced, both by personal experience and by what we all see and hear in the news and whatnot around us, that, I mean, our immigrant neighbors nationally and locally bring so much into our community. And I've been so appalled by what some of the federal policies have done in terms of, seems like on the one hand, we're happy to take all that they contribute, and on the other hand, we're not happy to give them a pathway to citizenship. Anyway, I don't want to go into a whole political rant, but I am convicted that we need to give them, we need to recognize the contribution and treat them justly, and that we want to be the kind of community where they're neighbors, and that's the way we know them, that's the way we interact with them, on a principle of equality and equal justice and humanity. And I guess my expectations or hopes for this is basically that we'll be able to find ways to add whatever clarity and specificity and whatnot we need, so that the ordinance can take effect and fulfill the intention with which it was brought. So, Devin.
Thank you, Diane. Devin seems to have frozen up. Devin, we cannot hear you, but we'll give you another minute. Devin, are you there? All right, it looks like maybe Devin has a little glitch in his connection.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, Devin, we can hear you now.
Okay. Sorry about that. I appear to be to do this without video. I apologize. I'm Devin Wilkie. I was there for most of my 8 years now in Lebanon, and well before that as well. My direct connection to this topic is fairly limited, but as someone who, other reasons, including that I am autistic, has faced discrimination and has faced anything from microaggressions to the preferential treatment of people in the majority, I am sensitive to the inequities that we face in our community, and whether or not this is something that's actually happening in Lebanon, which I, from my personal experience, have found Lebanon to be a very welcoming community. I want to see that we ensure it remains that way, and I see this as a way of codifying that. I am here representing the Welcoming Ordinance Committee. My primary goal and intention on the task force, of course, is to represent an interest of that committee as a whole, who have painstakingly under the signatures and build the ordinance. But personally, I'm very interested and invested in making sure we build and maintain this welcoming community that I found when I moved up here. So thank you.
Thank you, Devin. Sue, I'm going to ask you, have you heard back from Casey by any chance?
I have not, and I did. If anybody saw me texting, I was actually texting Karen to tell her that we really couldn't hear her well and asked her to move. So that was one thing. So I was doing that. I did reach out to Casey, haven't heard back, but I also text messaged the mayor because I know that he has his phone number to see if he could rouse him, and maybe the 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock piece was confusing, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of time between tonight and into the future where Casey will, contribute to we'll have plenty of opportunities to contribute to the topic and the group.
Wonderful. So Sue and Kathy, I think the two of you are left. If one of you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself. I see Sue raising her hand. So Kathy, you will follow Sue and introduce yourself however you'd like. So Sue, go ahead.
Sorry, Kathy, I had the advantage. I could raise my hand and she could see me, but we're going to get you squared away with video. Again, my name is Sue Prentice. I've been fortunate to serve on the City Council representing Ward 1 for a few years. I come to this topic from a couple of frames, one of which I'm going to kind of sort of work this backwards, is that I think it's probably 3 or 4 years ago, we were, faced with an incident in the city where we found people had found some literature that was, that had hateful language. Let's just be, I don't know what other way to describe it. And it raised this topic. And although I have, as Devin said, I've always found Lebanon to be a welcoming place, it was a reminder that this exists and it exists somewhere, and we just want to make sure it doesn't exist in our community. So we work together with a small group of folks, some of which are involved in this task force, to craft a resolution. You can find it on the City Council's website that speaks to the inclusiveness and the kind of city that we want to be. But as we move forward, that we're taking that resolution and we are memorializing it. We're putting it into our ordinance, into the ordinance to give it teeth. And so, what I think we're here to do, this has been voted in, that we need to resolve any conflicts that exist. And we know we have at least one in a legal opinion about Section 6. I think, as Barry stated, Bernie Waugh's done a nice job with this. So I know we have at least one area that we need to address. I think that Diane Root talked about very briefly, some clarity and some specificity may need to be drawn out as part of this process. Those are the key things for me. This has been voted in. We know there's at least one conflict. There's some areas where we may need to address some clarity and specificity. So let's get that taken care of. Again, we worked on an inclusiveness resolution in the past. We're gonna, now we're taking it from being a resolution to making it part, embedding it, memorializing it into our ordinance, because everyone is welcome. And I'm just going to point back to Devin for a second. I was writing notes. I like to follow along and make sure I cover everything. That, we're all here today, but 10, 20, 15, 30 years from now or longer, we might not all be either living in this city or we might not be on this earth. And what we do today needs to be memorialized so that it lives on past our time and is always part of Lebanon. Okay, that's what I'm going to say. I've covered my notes. Thank you.
Thank
Kat,
you,
I'll turn it over to Kathy Beckett.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Oh, great. I'm Kathy Beckett, and I am a member of the Welcoming Ordinance team. And so was involved with this from the inception, I guess, and did a lot of collecting signatures and talking to people. And we actually had over 700 signatures on the petition, which was amazing. And I have to say, the people of the city were very supportive of the petition and the ordinance. And it was good, so good to see that. But one of the reasons, I have a couple of reasons why I'm involved with this, became involved with this ordinance. I do have relationships with members of Lebanon's immigrant community through some of the work I do through a church group. It's a number of churches within and other faith communities within the Upper Valley. And so through those relationships, I've seen that people are unfortunately living in fear, and it has to do with our federal immigration policies, and people are affected by them in terms of, you know, they're afraid to apply for benefits. You know, it's not so much the people of Lebanon. I would say the people of Lebanon are very welcoming to immigrants and to people. I mean, maybe I shouldn't make assumptions. I'm sure everybody has a different experience, and I have spoken with people of color who are immigrants who have had bad experiences in Lebanon. So I guess we need to do what we can, and I think starting with a law that supports immigrants and ensures that they can live with less fear. But it'll be the beginning, I think, of some of our work, and I hope that we will have other endeavors in order to make sure that everyone in Lebanon feels welcome. And one of my specific goal, I would say, is to ensure that we have input from members of the community who will be impacted by this ordinance in terms of it making Lebanon a better place for them to live. Thank you.
Karen, you're muted.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Kathy. And this is Karen speaking again. And since there are people joining us by phone, I'll just go ahead, and I think it's helpful if we can use our names when we speak. That way, anyone who's watching, but anyone who's also listening will know who is speaking. And I believe that my role as chair is primarily to ensure that everyone who wants to speak has a chance to speak, and to keep us going according to our agenda and to our tasks. So I had to come up with the agenda for this evening, and I did consult with Sue Prentice a bit on that, but it was the first one, so we had to come up with it. In the future, hopefully we can have a consensus process to develop the agenda items. I'm going to paste right now into the meeting chat the agenda that
I've got it up here.
We lost you again, Karen.
I muted myself by accident. I apologize. So I have posted the agenda for the meeting in the meeting chat. It's also posted on the city website. But just a quick recap. We've just done some introductions of the committee members. I know that there are many members of the public joining us. It looks like we have at least 5 or 6 members of the public. You also are all very welcome, and we're glad that you are joining us. Just for time's sake, we're going to continue with our meeting, but if you have something urgent to say, I will just invite you at any time to please go ahead and interrupt and say, excuse me, I have something to say. But for the time being, please consider everyone that you are all very welcome, and we're happy that you are here listening in. And when there are appropriate times for you to participate, we're delighted to hear your input. My own personal perspective is that I hope that people, I hope that our committee, our task force will be engaged, but I also hope that other members of the public will feel welcome and able to participate as well. So what we had previewed in our agenda is that we would spend time planning our work, perhaps for the next half hour or so, maybe a little less, reviewing things like a meeting schedule and frequency, identifying issues that the task force would like to work on in particular. I think there is a fan going. I'm seeing in the comment that someone is saying there's a fan going, so maybe we can address that. Just a reminder to mute yourself if you are not speaking. Thank you. So we're going to spend a little time this evening planning our work. We will also looking at meeting schedule and frequency, identifying issues that we would like to work on, because maybe we don't have to work on every single provision that was passed by the voters in March. We can identify some of the future meeting topics so that we can start putting together agendas for the future and talking about the types of input that's desired. Kathy just raised an excellent point. She was saying that she hopes that people who might be particularly affected by this topic will be invited in particular to offer their feedback and have input into this. So those are the kinds of things we can talk about. I also had originally thought that we might have a presentation by our legal counsel, but unfortunately I didn't realize he was already booked in a different meeting this evening. So we're not joined this evening by legal counsel, but it is the intention that in the future, Bernie Waugh, who is representing the city of Lebanon in this matter, will be able to join us so that if we do have questions, we will be able to get his input and ask him questions directly, which I think will be very valuable. And then I did put a little placeholder for other items in case there's anything that we haven't spoken about. So let's go ahead and talk about these the issue of planning our work. With regard to our work, the mayor had asked that we be prepared to present recommendations. I always find that it's helpful to begin with the end in mind. That's, I think, one of the principles of Stephen Covey from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And so I always kind of do the backwards planning. So the mayor asked us if we would be, if we could prepare ourselves to make recommendations to the city council during the month of September. Just given that the ordinance will go into effect in January and that the months of November and December are really occupied by the budget for the city council, if our group is able to make recommendations to the city council in September, that will then give the month of October for the council to engage with the recommendations, have its own public hearings, and ultimately make, schedule whatever follow-up steps will be required. So our task is to figure out what we need to do and to get it done by September, which gives us some time, but not all that much time. So I would open it up for discussions about if folks have strong feelings about meeting schedule and frequency. It's helpful for logistics purposes if we can talk about that tonight. So I will just start out by saying that my sense is that this might be since we have the months of June, July, and August, and maybe that first meeting in September if we need it, we have essentially 3 months that I would propose 2 meetings per month, which would give us 6 months, which would give us rather 6 meetings, maybe 7 to conduct our work. Does that seem acceptable? I see Devin's head nodding. I see Diane giving me a thumbs up. Sue is nodding. I see Barry with a thumbs up. Kathy, what do you think about that? Kathy, if you are trying to speak, you just need to press that.
I agree.
Okay, so great. I hear that Kathy is in agreement. So we'll go ahead and plan on twice a month meetings. So this is the nice thing about these task forces is that they are, discrete. They have a specific duration, and so we'll plan for that. I think given that many people are working, even though some people might not be, I think we'll have to stick to evening meetings. And so I will do my best to accommodate. I will consult with Casey to see if, since he was not here, maybe Thursday night is not a particularly ideal time for him, but I will consult with him. Are there any days of the week that are better or worse than others? And I guess, I can just go around the group. Diane, is there any day of the week that's out of the question for you?
Yeah, I have a class on Monday evening.
Okay, thank you, Diane. How about you, Barry?
Mondays tend to be land use board meetings, so sometimes I'm not available.
Okay, so Monday is a difficult day. That's good. All right, Devin, how about you?
I would also like to omit Thursdays. I had to reschedule 2 meetings for tonight because, sorry, it's usually my one meeting night of the week. So anything that's not Thursday usually works great for me.
Okay, thank you. Understood. And I'm sorry. Thank you for accommodating us on this evening. I appreciate that. We'll certainly try and work with that. Sue Prentice, how about you?
I was going to say maybe so Wednesday nights are the nights that are the roughest because we have council, and although that's sometimes 2 nights, only 2 Wednesdays, sometimes it's more. And I have advanced transit at least once, sometimes twice a month, depending on executive committee on Thursday evenings.
Okay.
And other than that, I can be very flexible. So are we looking at Tuesdays? Because
it kind of looks like that. Why don't we hear from Kathy? Kathy, do you have any absolute no days? And Kathy, you'll just
Hi. Thursdays are actually not the best evening for me either. I also had to miss another meeting tonight for this. And the other meetings I have on Monday and Tuesday, I can forego them. So
okay.
Should be okay.
All right. So then looking at the days of the week that everyone has identified, I'm assuming Friday, Saturday, and Sunday we probably want to avoid. And so it looks like Tuesday is going to be the best day. And thank you, Kathy. I heard you say that you do have meetings on those nights, but they're able to be rescheduled. So I appreciate in advance your willingness to be flexible on that. I'll consult with Casey, but I think tentatively, let's plan that we will use Tuesdays, and we'll go ahead and try and get those days on the calendar so that everyone can know and plan for the remainder of our meetings for June, July, August, and let's go ahead. We'll plan for one in September, just so that I think it's better to err on the side of more rather than less. And if we finish early, then we'll consider it a bonus. Okay, so wonderful. So we have addressed meeting schedule and frequency. I would like to talk about, let's go into the types of input desired, because I think that will help us develop our agendas. And I heard Kathy say in particular that she's interested in hearing from people who are affected on this topic. And I think I'm certainly hoping that people, I think I should say, first of all, that Sue Prentice and I are the 2 city councilor representatives to this committee. Devin Wilkie and Kathy Beckett are the 2 representatives from the Welcoming Lebanon Ordinance Citizen Committee that was formed. And then Diane Root, Barry Schuster, and Casey Montas are 3 members of the community that the mayor appointed to this task force. And so I think the reason that I wanted to just remind us of that is that I hope that Kathy and Devin can help us as a task force make connections with members of the community who we may not already be in communication with, and help us identify people who would be willing to communicate and engage with us on this topic. So I'm just going to make a note that affected members of the community is a group that we'd like to hear from. I'd love to hear from other members of the task force on other people that we would like to hear from, other groups, other perspectives. Who else are we interested in? This is not going to be exhaustive or exclusive for the lawyer in the group, but just as a starting point, who else would we be interested in hearing from on this topic?
Well, I will jump in. I know Kathy and I have discussed this with the Citizen Committee, that a few other possibilities that we had considered of worthwhile input members of the community for input. If we look a little bit farther afield than Lebanon, cities like Chicago that have implemented similar ordinances and have actually been there and done that with what we are trying to do right now. I believe Kathy had said she was already in contact with one such city official or other involved member. I think if we can see the roadmap that was already created and followed, that might help us with our process.
Thank you, Devin. That's a great input. So I'll say other cities who have engaged in this kind of a process. Okay. Anyone else have some thoughts on this?
If I can, I'll step in and put my lawyer hat on, I guess. Given the debate that's gone on in Hartford about the federal conflict with federal funding, federal rules, and so on, I'd like to know, what is the city in jeopardy from losing any funding or financial issues? In some ways, the welcoming ordinance is very broad, and that's great. I mean, that speaks for itself. I guess now it's what are the consequences of what's been adopted by the city, and again, I look at those from the legal consequences, and I appreciate Bernie's letters, but they're like Chicago and other cities, as Devin was saying. I'd like to see how other towns and cities have dealt with that, and how we deal with those consequences. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Great. Sue, I see you raising your hand. Just don't forget to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm unmuted. So I just want to kind of sort of piggyback onto both Devin and Barry. So I think the experiences I've had with like groups, when we look at other towns and cities that have done this kind of work, Devin, you're right. They've got the roadmap, and it doesn't mean we have to follow it exactly, but we can learn a lot from them. So whoever we can identify, one or two groups, they don't necessarily have to be our size, but they've dealt with this. I think that's like super smart and exact. And the greatest thing, so although it's, we're constrained by COVID and we have to meet electronic or virtually, it actually opens up the world to us to bring, one or two other folks into the conversation. So yay, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's great. And then Barry, you raised the question about, say, what's, some of the discussions going on in Hartford and whether we're in jeopardy or not. For clarity, for me, I wanted to add on to the list about, say, the word, what agent. I had written myself a note about what constitutes, say, an agent of the city. And what I mean is not law enforcement, but if I'm kind of, I'm thinking about, I'm working at the polls. I'm somebody who's working on election day, and I'm an agent of the city, or I'm a city clerk and I'm an agent of the city. And there's any time where any information that this ordinance would, prohibit or call into jeopardy, how do we clarify, what that agent is, or what that might mean, where there might be a conflict? Am I making sense? Okay, so
Absolutely, and I see heads nodding, so
okay, yeah. So I just want to, I think just wanted to add that on, like, to the to-do list. Okay.
That's great. And I see that we're talking about kind of a combination of both groups that we might like to hear from, or other folks, but we're also starting to do some of the issue identification. So that's fine. So I saw Diane raise her hand. So Diane, I'll give you a chance to speak, and then Kathy, we haven't heard from you, so I'll go to you after Diane, and to see if you'd like to add to the conversation. Diane, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I didn't have a sort of new category of people we wanted to hear from, but just to add that not only that to have people who actually have some length of experience living under the ordinance, and not only people who are kind of still going through the same process we're going through, but people who really have that length of time of experience, I think would be helpful.
That's great. So finding some of the folks who have gone first in this process and seeing what they've learned, I think that's a great point. Okay, thank you, Diane. Kathy, I'd like to go ahead and give you a chance to weigh in on this topic if you'd like.
Sure. So to the point of people or places that have had experience with this, Chicago initiated their welcoming city ordinance in 1985 under Mayor Washington. So they have quite a bit of experience. And I also think that in terms of the wording of the ordinance, that we have a resource in the welcoming Hartford ordinance, and also in the Hanover ordinance regarding some of the wording that would help in terms of that, specifically that issue around elections and voting, and that is clarified in the Hartford ordinance. So I think a lot of our work is going to be simplified by looking at what's been done in other cities and towns.
That's great. Thank you, Kathy. So it sounds like there's a lot of agreement. We've got a good list. So people who are affected directly here in Lebanon, other cities, and also whether they're further afield like Chicago or closer like Hanover and Hartford, to see how they have been, what they have learned, and how things have been going for them. We have also talked about the topics of what are the consequences. I texted you. It's in my bedroom. What are the consequences of the ordinance? And Barry raised the question, and particularly in terms of federal funding, the question about who is an agent of the city, which is some of the specific language. And so those are some of the things that we've identified so far, which I think is a great start. And I'm sure we'll come up with some more as we go on. That's certainly to be expected. I'll add for myself, I would like to hear from our police chief and our departments here in Lebanon, as well as other members of city staff who are going to be affected and their work is going to be affected by this. I'd like to hear from them on their perspectives. How in its current wording, how would it affect them? What changes do they think would be practical in helping them? They know their jobs best, and I certainly want to accede to the wishes of the voters But I also want to make sure that it's practical for people to implement. So I'm interested, I would just add to the group people, sorry, I'm adding, my laptop is almost dead. Soon to be rectified. So I would add current city staff to our list of folks to involve as well as our legal staff. I'm also particularly interested in hearing from, I think it's Kira Kelly, who has been offering another legal perspective. So I'm interested in hearing from her as well, because she testified quite knowledgeably and competently to the city council. And so I think we would benefit from her perspective as well. And I know that the city is represented by its own legal counsel, but I think it's also helpful to hear other legal interpretations. So those are the two groups that I would add: current city staff, and particularly our police chief, as well as the attorney who has been involved in this from the citizens' petition perspective. I guess I would like to open this up to members of the public. We've been talking about potential groups that we would like to hear from, or the kinds of input, and we've also been talking about particular questions that we might have that we would like to explore, so issues we'd like to explore. I'd like to give a chance to members from the public to weigh in on this topic. I know that there are some people who are listening in tonight. If there's anything that we haven't covered tonight that you would like to make sure that we are incorporating into our planning for the next couple of months, what have we not spoken about that you'd like to see on our list tonight? I'm going to open it up to the public now. If you are listening on the phone, you just have to press *6 to unmute yourself. And so if you would like to weigh in, please go ahead and unmute yourself now and just start speaking. We'll figure it out. I'm not hearing anyone, but I'm just going to give it another minute just in case anyone's having a hard time unmuting themselves. So if you're in the public and you'd like to weigh in at this point, you're welcome to do so. Okay, I'm going to consider that an enthusiastic endorsement of everything we've been talking about so far. All righty, so then let's go ahead and move on to the next topic in our, and I had said that we would finish by 8:30, and I promise we will, and if we finish earlier, that certainly is a possibility as well. So the next topic then is to actually review, to look at the language that was approved by the voters themselves in March, and to what I'm hoping, and this may be ambitious, but what I'm hoping is that there might be issues that we can identify as like needing to be requiring attention, and maybe issues that are not particularly requiring attention. I don't know if that's the right way to go about it, but I guess I would like to open it up to a conversation about, I'd like to look at the specific ordinance itself, and the ordinance itself, which was distributed in the agenda materials, and maybe you also have your own copies, but there are 6 particular provisions in the Welcoming Lebanon ordinance that was adopted by the voters. So it's possible that we don't necessarily have to work on all 6 of the provisions. Maybe we only need to work on 3 of them, or 2 of them, or who knows. So I want to open it up to the group to talk about I guess if there are particular provisions that they believe need work or that will require our attention, and alternatively, if someone wants to say, I think this one is a consensus one, then that we don't need to talk about. I just want to have a little bit of conversation about that now. We don't have to make any decisions. Tonight is simply about identifying what we want to work on, particularly first, and maybe identifying the issues where there might be the most work to do so that we can organize ourselves. It's not about making any decisions tonight, just about getting ourselves organized. I see.
This is Kathy.
Yep. Or go ahead, Kathy. Kathy, I hear you. Why don't you go ahead and you can
Sure.
start thinking.
Thank you. So I'm thinking one of the things, and I'm looking at considering the Bernie Waugh's opinion, and it's the one thing we need to do is consider the format of the ordinance to include a section list, a title, purpose and intent, and definitions, etc. So I think the issue of agent and agency will be clarified by defining that, and I understand that it'd be important to make sure that we have the format and have the right format for an ordinance. And I think another concern that Attorney Waugh raised was the concern regarding members, and this was also raised by members of the City Council regarding data collection in the first provision, making sure that we do collect data and in order to prevent bias policing. And so a possibility that occurs is that of community oversight of policing using data in a proactive manner. It would engage people from the community with the police force, and in order to really strengthen policing in the city and making it as effective as possible. So, building those community relationships and trust. So I think that's something that we might want to look at. And also making provision 1 more inclusive regarding who is protected as in the Hanover ordinance. That's something that we might want to consider working on. And so, yeah, I know provision 1 seems to be an issue in terms of ensuring that there's not biased policing, but also using sometimes it's necessary to use descriptions of individuals based on an actual crime, and I think that there's an example in the Hanover ordinance that seems to cover, could be possibly a remedy, and I would be interested to see what Bernie Waugh's opinion would be about that particular wording in the Hanover ordinance. And also provision, I know I'm going on and on about everything so far.
This is a big topic. There's a lot to say, and you've been working on this for a very long time, Kathy. So you have a lot of knowledge on this. Feel free to continue and share your thoughts.
Well, the last one I have is I know the provision 3, the issue of voting came up, and I believe that if we could share the wording that Hartford came up with Attorney Waugh and see what his opinion is about that. Maybe that would be helpful. And that's it. I did have another resource I was wondering about, if we could possibly tap into the ACLU as a possible resource for us as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kathy. And I'm going to add ACLU to our list of groups we might want some input from. So I'll make that note. All right, Kathy has identified a number of places. It sounds like some work on Provision 1, but she also, what I like about Kathy's input right there is that she offered areas to work on, but she also offered potential solutions. Very, very handy there, Kathy. So she talked about Provision 1, Provision 3. She also talked about the form of the ordinance, and also this concept of community oversight. So I've made some notes, and I have more notes as well, but just summing up a little bit. Sue, I saw that your hand was raised. Why don't we can go to you next? And then if anyone else wants to think about their thoughts, I see Barry, you'll be on deck, if you will.
I think that Section 6, I know that's been called in, I mean, clearly from the meeting in January through till now, we know that that's an outstanding issue that we need to resolve. That's all. So it's very obvious. Bring it up, put it on the list. Got to figure out what to do.
Section 6 being the notification.
Notification, yeah. And that was.
Yep. All right. Excellent. So I've made a note of that. Thank you, Sue. Barry, you are up. And let's see, whoever else wants to go after that can think about their thoughts.
I was pleased to hear comments about purpose, intent, and definitions, because Provision 1 leaves me with a lot of questions, because I love data and I love collecting data. And when I was on the school board for longer than I could count, I guess, one of the things that was so important to us was finding out that there were over 39 different languages spoken in the school, and it was one of the highest in the state. That's a piece of data that's really important to me as a school board member, because we need to address people's who are really learning a second language or English as a second language. And if we have 17 Thai speakers, that's different than just one. And so we really do need to collect data. But on the other hand, I think in that first section where it talks about profiling, targeting, detaining, those, especially profiling and targeting, they have more pernicious sounds to me. Collecting data could be for health purposes. You know, there are clearly certain people can be more susceptible to different illnesses. I mean, even with COVID, we know that poor African Americans are being overly affected by it. And so knowing that information, I just never want to not know something. It's what we do with it that counts. And that's why I say, if we define profile or targeting, I mean, it's one thing to collect it, but it's another thing to act adversely to that group just because we know it exists. That's what troubles me. So I'm all for data, but it depends on how we do it. And maybe that's where having some community group working with the city for oversight or something like that. So there's a balance, that's all. So I like data, but we do have to be careful, obviously. So thank you.
Well, that's good. And that's a really interesting point, that even some of the words are that there's a different connotation to the word collect than there is to the word profile or target. Very good point there. So thank you, Barry. Let's see, Diane, Devin, do either of you want to weigh in on this? I see Diane raised her hand, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm glad Barry raised that question. I think we are, whoever we is, I don't want to presume what other people think. But clearly there needs to be some clarity about, on the one hand, absolutely discriminatory behavior is not accepted, period. And as you say, Barry, the collection of data, for example, as a basis for evaluating fair and impartial policing is important. So, you know, I think earlier there had been a place on the agenda for what are some discussions we need to have? Well, that seems like one of the discussions that we need to have is how, and maybe some of these other resources like from other communities can give us the clear language, but just to clarify, the intent is to be really take a clear and enforceable position against discriminatory behavior. But that does not mean that you cannot be using data for useful purposes, but you know, just how we say that. So
That's great. Thank you, Diane. Devin, we'll give the floor to you.
Sure. I don't know as though I have much to add except to agree with all the other points that are already made. I think we should absolutely be looking at these provisions that have raised concerns in the community and looking at the solutions such as civilian oversight that we could use. On provision 1, I don't know if this opens a new can of worms, but in Attorney Kira Kelly's opinion, the language that's particularly important there is on the basis of, and she used that to mean that it's the primary reason for collecting this data. And so I would be curious to see if that opinion is something that can find its way into the final language that we can use, because of course, I think that that is the ultimate intention between, you know, what Barry's saying, I agree, I love data. If we could play with all the data that we could find and then some, I would be thrilled. Use it to benefit everybody as much as possible, and absolutely do not prevent us from collecting the data that we can use to make sure we are talking to the students in our school in the language that they need, that we are making sure police aren't discriminating, that no agent or agency of the city is discriminating. So we absolutely don't want to prevent that, but we want to make sure that we make these meanings clearer. So I think I agree that we should absolutely focus efforts on refining the language and making sure this is a concrete, specific, enforceable ordinance and part of the city's code. I'm also very curious to see how we can, in that same vein, make the 6th provision more specific, more enforceable, and more actionable, as opposed to, as Attorney Waugh suggested, something that's so vague that nobody would even know what to do with it. So I guess that's the long-winded way of me saying that I agree. These provisions, these topics that people have mentioned here are absolutely what I think should be front and center of our discussion on the ordinance itself.
Thank you, Devin. So I think if I can just recap, I think what I'm seeing here is that there is certainly an agreement that we have some work to do in terms of developing a purpose, intent section that also has titles, definitions, so looking at some format issues for the ordinance. And then with regard to the actual ordinance that was passed by the voters that has the 6 provisions, Provision 1 has been identified as an area needing focus. Provision 3 has also been identified. Provision 6 has also been identified. So I'm seeing that 1, 3, and 6 at least should be our primary focuses. And it's not to say that, you know, 2, 4, and 5 don't have work to do, but we'll certainly front load it, I think, with 1, 3, and 6, because those have jumped out at us as the immediate areas of that need to be addressed. Does that comport with what people have been hearing so far? I see heads nodding, some heads nodding. Okay. Kathy, I want to give you a chance to nod your head or not.
Yep, I'm on board.
Okay, great. Is there any member of the public who would wish to weigh in now that you've heard the discussion over the last 10, 15 minutes here? Is there any particular provision in the ordinance that was passed by the voters that that you would like to raise that has not already been raised in our discussion so far? Going to open it up to members of the public and remind you if you're participating by phone, you just need to press *6 to unmute yourself before speaking. Alrighty, I'm not hearing anyone yet, but I will give another chance for the public to weigh in before we close the meeting, so that if there's someone who just hasn't had a chance to speak, there will still be a chance for the public to weigh in before we adjourn. So we've talked about the meeting schedule and frequency. It looks like we're looking at Tuesdays twice a month for the next 3.5 months. We've talked about some future meeting topics and the types of input that we would like to see. We've identified issues. We looked at the ordinance itself and identified the particular provisions and some issues that we would like to focus on over those coming 6 or 7 meetings that we have. One last thing, and we've done some of this so far, but I imagine over the course of our work that we may have specific questions for legal counsel, as well as for the police chief, or potentially other members of city government who will be involved. So I want to just bring up this topic since it was on the agenda, developing a list of questions for legal counsel, the police chief, or others. Is there anything that anyone, and it's okay, tonight is not the last chance by any means, but if there's anything that someone would like to raise tonight and get it on the list, this would be a good time to do that. And we did talk about, Barry raised the question of what are the consequences in terms of federal funding, for example. So that's a question that we have on there. We do have some opinions on that, but I think it's a question that the group will probably want to hear from our legal counsel on specifically, and maybe have a chance to ask further questions. We also had the question that Sue Prentice raised about what is an agent, and we will want to engage with legal counsel on that so that we can develop a definition that ultimately might appear in the ordinance. Any other questions that have not been raised yet that we want to make sure we capture this evening? Okay, I see Devin raised his hand, and I see Barry also has a question. So Devin, and then Barry.
I just want to reiterate, I believe Kathy had mentioned earlier, and this isn't something that we can raise with legal counsel just yet, but once we identify elements of other ordinances that may address the concerns in the legal opinion, we would like to check and see that they are that they pass legal muster.
That's great. Thank you for reminding me of that, Devin. Yes, I'm making a note about that. Thank you. Barry.
Devin, and I'm following you on a lot of points, Devin, but if there are materials we can have for the next meeting as much in advance, that would be great, especially any, and maybe Kathy knows more, or Devin knows more about this since I'm a newcomer to the welcoming movement, I'll say, but people who think we haven't gone far enough and might be critical of what we've done, I'd like to know what they think could be done, if that's an example out there, whether it's been adopted or not. I guess I'd like to hear the arguments on both sides. Who thinks we haven't gone far enough, and who thinks we've gone so far off we're falling off the cliff. I don't know what has been presented to the council previously. I don't want to revisit every argument that has been made, but it would just be interesting to me. And again, I might not even need to discuss it, but I love to read the stuff ahead of time, and it just helps me get some background on it. So that would be very useful.
Absolutely. And what if I aim for getting materials to the task force at a minimum of 1 week prior to the meeting? Is that good? Is that kind of a reasonable amount of time? Okay, I see people shaking their heads and thumbs up. So I'll certainly make that my goal. That and I know this time it was not that much, but I also knew that we were not going to be necessarily making substantive decisions and more kind of process and planning questions. So I will make that commitment to at the very least aiming for 1 week for delivery of the background packet. So good questions. I've made notes of those, and I think I can certainly work with Devin and Kathy to make sure that we get some of the perspectives from people who might feel we haven't gone far enough. And then I know that we also have had a number of people in the community who testified, for example, in January, and I'm thinking of Al Patterson, and I can't think of the names of others, but folks who maybe feel that we are going too far. And so I can reach out to make sure that we have some of those perspectives as well, because certainly we want to include everyone. If our whole business is about welcoming Lebanon, we need to welcome all perspectives into our discussions. Sue, I think I saw you raising your hand. What do you want to add?
No, I think you're good.
Okay.
I might have been waving off a bug, but we're all good here.
All
I'm
right.
right by a window, so there's all sorts of action.
Okay.
Can I add something?
Please.
Hi. I was wondering if we should also consider that there are some general principles. I'm thinking of the fact that being in this country without documents is not a crime. And I think a lot of the opposition in that, and there were very few people who voiced opposition, was based on a misunderstanding that it is a crime to be here without documents. So I think we should be more than willing to listen to people. However, there are some basic principles or truths, and based on the Constitution, based on interpretations of law, court decisions that take precedence over someone's opinion based on misinformation for the most part. But I agree that we should listen to people. But I think we also need to have a foundation in the legal process and law. And I'm also hoping that we, as members of this committee, can contribute, solid information around constitutional decisions, particularly around issues such as funding, and so forth. So, that's another thing I hope that we as a task force can contribute to this effort.
That's great. Thank you, Kathy. I hear that, and I duly noted.
And Karen,
yes, go ahead.
Jump in real. That's the sort of thing that could go into a preamble that provides some basis for this. That's all. Great.
All right. I see we're starting to kind of form some concepts. This is a good start. Did I see someone have their hand raised? So I didn't. Yes, Devin.
I have a question and a scheduling comment.
Yeah.
And I'll start with the scheduling comment, which is very briefly that I think it would make sense for us to, as soon as possible, as soon as we can effectively notify and collect opinions, hear from the public and hear from our other knowledgeable sources on the earlier side of our work, and hear from legal opinions and hear from anything that would pertain to the final wording and format of the ordinance on the later side of our work. Just because I personally would prefer to be guided by what we hear from the people who are affected, be they city employees or migrant and local residents of the community. Migrant and native, I apologize. So that was my comment in terms of my thoughts regarding schedule. Question regarding where to send documents so that this fits within right to know. Sue had asked about getting copies of the language of other ordinances, which I can happily send. I have a file that I've collected relevant materials. And Diane, I see, had asked about the standard format for ordinances. Should we understand that the best option would be to send those documents to you, or is there someone else to whom we should send them to be disseminated to the task force?
That is a very good question. I would, in brief, the right to know law says that any communications to more than a quorum, a majority of a public group, are considered public materials, and so they ought to be available to the public. What I would recommend at this point, and I have copied on our communications so far, I have copied Beth Baraldi, who is the executive assistant in the city manager's office. What I would suggest at this point is that if you have materials to share with the entire group, share them with the entire group. Everyone has the list of the entire group, but be sure to copy Beth Baraldi on those communications so that then she can be the holder of the public record. Okay, so we can each talk to each other one-on-one individually, but I think it's probably better. Oh, I see Diane somehow got kicked out. Diane, I see you got kicked out, but we're letting you back in, and you can unmute yourself. Diane, are you back with us? I see her here.
I'm good. I'm sorry. Accident. Technical accident.
Okay, great. I'm glad you're able to make it back. I was just saying that if you have communications to share, documents to share with the group, share it with the entire group. There's an email distribution list that you've all been copied on, but be sure to share Beth Baraldi, to copy her on it so she can share that. What I would request everyone to do is to not add any commentary. It's one thing to share documents so that we all have the information, but please don't share commentary. Part of the important part of the right to know law is that deliberations of public bodies ought to happen in public, and they shouldn't happen in email chains that the public has to read afterwards. So our deliberations should happen here, being this remote world that we're all living in, but at our appointed meeting times. But if there is information that you find, language that you find, please share that with the group. That will not be circumventing the right to know law, as long as you share, as long as you include Beth Baraldi from the City of Lebanon on those emails so that it is part of the public record. Just please don't add your own commentary. Hopefully that is clear. I'm sure that I will be corrected if I have given bad guidance, and I will be sure to share that with all of you. We certainly want to do all of our work in public with transparency so that the community can be very well informed on what we're doing. Okay, I see that it is 8:23, and I promised our meeting would end at 8:30. I think we've covered everything that we've wanted to talk about, but I'm sure that maybe people have things they have not had a chance to say yet. I would like to open that up now first to task force members. Barry, you can go first.
A 1-minute pitch. It would be lovely if one of our meetings could be held on the green. I know there's a great ability to bring somebody in from Chicago using Teams, but it might be not only fun, but really socially distantly appropriate, as well as socially benefiting all of us to just be in one place, even if we're 7 feet apart. That's my one minute pitch, and if there's anything that we can do to have that happen, I'd be in favor of it.
Okay, Devin is clapping, so you're getting an ovation for that. I concur, and we're very fortunate that the summer season is going to be upon us, so I think it's more possible than if it were January.
Weather permitting, you know, maybe there's only one meeting maybe, but it would be nice.
Okay. Anyone else from the task force want to add anything in other topics or anything we've covered that you haven't had a chance to say yet? Go ahead. Kathy, do you have anything you want to add? I want to give you a chance since you're on the phone and I can't see you.
No, I'm all set. Just want to thank everyone.
Great.
For your input.
Thank you, Kathy. Is there any member of the public who wants to weigh in? We have a few minutes left, so if there's anyone who has something they want to add before we wrap up our meeting, you're more than welcome. Alrighty, well, I'm not hearing anyone else, and so I guess I see Sue's dog has joined us. That's very cute.
She's become a regular at the end of city meetings. She tolerates it, and then she starts to get a little whiny. Sorry. I'm like, it's okay. I know, you're fine.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this meeting. I will consult with Casey just to make sure that Tuesdays work for him. But as soon as I do that, I will go ahead and work with Beth Beraldi to schedule these, and the city manager's office to schedule our meetings for the rest of the summer so that we can carve out and protect those dates and our work together. I want to say thank you very much to all of you for being willing to participate. And also, you know, I think when we did our introductions, everyone was really, you know, came forward and shared things. And I think that got us off to a very good start. So I am always optimistic. I'm a glass half full kind of person, but I am certainly optimistic that I heard a lot of shared values this evening. And I believe that we will be able to work together collaboratively and congenially over the coming months in the best interest of the people of Lebanon. And I look forward to working with all of you. So I will be in touch about our upcoming meeting schedule, and I have good notes on everything we've talked about. And so thank you very much. We're off to a good start.
Thank you as well. Do we need to move to adjourn or?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so moved.
I second.
All right. Motion by Devin, seconded by Barry. I guess we have to do a roll call vote because that's the protocol here. So I'll go ahead and call the roll. Devin.
Aye.
Barry.
Aye.
Sue.
Aye.
Diane.
Aye.
You're okay.
Kathy.
Okay.
Kathy, do you want to vote on our motion to adjourn?
Aye, yeah, unfortunately, there's a delay, so yeah.
Yeah, there is, and I'll keep that in mind in the for future meetings. Hopefully, though, it won't be an issue, and you'll be able to participate by video. But we've got an aye vote from Kathy and we've got an aye vote from Karen. And so this meeting is adjourned. I'm going to end the meeting for all of us. Have a good night, everyone.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.